Welcome to the Fulfillment Game. Here we have meaningful conversations with accomplished professionals exploring life and career beyond just material accomplishments. I'm your host, Amit Sood. Today we have Shenandoah Shifalu. She works with trauma, but trauma way beyond the individual heart. She works with healing of trauma in organizations. I am really keen to understand from her this new rare but path-breaking work that she's been doing. What is the kind of trauma that organizations carry?
Mm.
What is the impact of such trauma in the long run on people and the possibilities that organizations can work for? Shen is the creator of Healing Centered Leadership Pathway, a very practical framework for leaders on cultural change centered on trauma informed, healing centered leadership. And you can see how rare is that. Chen is the founder of Shifalu Consulting, the author of the award-winning memoir Garbage Bag Suitcase. I'm really looking forward to these conversations. Shen, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Amit, thank you so much for inviting me on the Fulfillment Game podcast. I'm super excited to take on this journey and conversation with you about organizational healing.
Shen, tell us your story. What did it take for you to get here? What have you had to overcome? Share some moments that shaped this mission.
Thanks so much. I want to be brief about it because the work really isn't about me, but I think for many people who are on healing journeys and who are looking for their path in life, you can't also find that in a course curriculum anywhere. Right? That many jobs and many people that I talk to, you find yourself in a career that you could have never picked for yourself when you were 17 or 18. And so for me, that's very true. I grew up in the United States in the foster care system. I spent the first 13 years of my life with my biological mom, and we moved quite a bit. It was quite an unstable upbringing, and I lived all across the country. And then at the age right before I turned, in fact, the summer before I turned 13, I found myself in foster care, and I spent the next 5 years in foster care, eventually aging out of the foster care system. And of course, for your listeners who might not be aware, is nobody comes to the foster care system because situations are good, right? Everyone winds up there because of trauma. And my story is no different. I suffered in lots of ways, physically, emotionally. And so abuse and neglect are very much a part of my childhood. And I made a commitment to myself when I aged out of the system that I really never wanted to talk about it, that I was going to fake it till I made it and just push all that stuff down because I'm a really proud American and we just want to pretend everything is great. And I think I had a bit of that Pollyanna syndrome of, nope, if I just act like everything's fine, everything will be fine. And what I found is, and people ask me this now as an adult, how did you hide it for so long? Because I hid it from my eventual spouse, I hid it from everybody. And what I realized is people don't really ask. We don't, we there's just questions we don't ask, and we're not curious anymore. And so I was really busy faking it, and it was costing me a lot. I was miserable. I was depressed. When I started college, I was suicidal. And I just thought, I just have to keep going. And if I can get a job and if I can pay for an apartment, then I've made it. Like that's, if I can feed myself, if I can do some of these basic things. And I eventually found my way to becoming a receptionist at a law office while I was working through college. And got good and moved up and became a paralegal and eventually became a law office administrator. I hired my spouse for his first job in the law. And then we decided to open a law practice together. And we did that together for about 15 years. And in that process of me still pushing down all of my stuff, we began to ask a question about our clients, really, which was, how could we help them make better decisions? I think of the law, people who do silly things sometimes or unexplainable things sometimes. And that question had good timing because I got introduced to some work by Dr. Vincent Folletti around adverse childhood experiences that started ruffling some feathers internally. I had this idea that I'd go back to school to get a coaching certificate, but perhaps we could coach our clients to better decisions. And all of those things came to a head, all crossed paths at the same time. And I had a realization about early childhood experiences, outcomes, not only on our physical health, but our mental health. And so decided to write my first book, Garbage Bag Suitcase, which required me to get on a healing path that I didn't know I needed to go on.
Wow.
And so that then led me to talking about trauma, but with people who deeply understood trauma, but didn't see how they were a part of trauma. So I started in the child welfare arena, people who were trying to help other people. And I quickly realized that the people in the systems themselves had unresolved trauma. And so it got me thinking, gosh, we all accept that everybody has a story, everybody has been through something. But what happens when we collectively show up together and everyone's trauma is exacerbated and we all begin acting from that fight, flight, freeze, appease part of our brain versus the executive functioning part of our brain and the long-term impacts of us in society, which is how I got interested then in not just the individual healing, the yes and individuals have a duty, but also what is the duty when we're collectively together in organizations, in families, in systems, in community together.
Shen, what a powerful story. I'm just curious, and since you've studied this work, you're not just inside out, but
Yeah.
also outside in.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to this, I was wondering, how is it that we show up when we haven't yet owned our trauma? We haven't yet fully
Mm.
become present to it. So, as a young person, as a young man or a woman, when we are still in our schools or in colleges and we are trying to look fine and great and win at life, and there is no patience in either the friends or the system for our not being at our best.
Yeah.
What's going on for a person at that point of time? How would one know that I'm carrying trauma at such a time?
Yeah. I think everybody probably has their own realization or breaking point. And for me, like I was faking it, but it was so heavy and so hard. I've said this to a lot of people that in the depths of some of my depression, somebody tried to introduce me to the law of attraction,
Mm.
right? Which was if you think positively, then positive things will happen to you. And I remember thinking, this is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard because who has all these positive thoughts? I don't know a single person who's having all of this positivity. So, how does one have a positive thought? Was a real question for me, which is why understanding trauma became so personal for me. And what I ultimately realized is it's impossible to have a positive thought if you have unhealed trauma and you haven't done some work first. Like the law of attraction can be very powerful, but in order to even get to that to work, there's like a lot of work for people to do.
Yeah.
And that sort of comes in at the tail end of assuming you're like a functioning human being. And some of us aren't functioning very well, right? We're using really maladaptive coping skills to get through the day. And so I think what makes people have that realization is different for all of us. For me, it's very clear is that I was suffering. And listen, my undergrad took me 8 years. It wasn't like show and go to classes, get your degree. It took me quite a long time. And I was working for a professor, and I think he knew I was struggling. He was a history professor. It wasn't really in his wheelhouse of maybe what was happening. And he suggested I go to therapy, which I was really opposed to be quite frank, because I had gone to a lot of forced therapy as a kid. It never seemed to work or help. And he was like, "Hey, just give it a shot. This is a colleague of mine. I think you'll really like him." And one thing about being at a large university, for me, Michigan State, is there's a lot of really good professionals that are at the top of their field sometimes. And for me, I remember sitting down with him and laying out my whole life story, telling him what I was suffering with. And he said, I just hate to tell you, but like, you're 18. Like, these are normal things.
Oh my goodness.
But it was really the first time that somebody said I was normal. Like, that this hardship is normal. Like, you're going through something that is really normal. And that, yeah, you have all this stuff that happened to you, but like, you're 18 and you get to determine the future. And it was a moment of clarity. Now, it wasn't like, hey, I was totally fixed, but it was this moment for the first time that I was in control of what could happen next. And so for me, that was a really big piece of one, being called normal, because I had never felt normal. I had always felt like the outcast. And two, I could choose. And so finally feeling like that, oh, because I'd spent my whole life not choosing, right? There was a parent choosing, there was the system choosing, there was a judge in my case choosing. And there was this sudden, I could choose what's next. And that there was a lot of freedom, a lot of scariness in that, but also a lot of freedom in that. So that was a big starting shift for me, and the idea that I could choose my path. And then I suffered a lot more. And then at some point said, this is no way to spend my time. And I think maybe I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I had the realization that none of us were getting out of here alive. And how did I want to spend that really short period of time? And so I think that really spurred the first book. I almost need to tell the story to free myself from being locked into that being my only story. And so I think that's why writing that memoir became so helpful for me. It wasn't cathartic, it was really painful. I say that quite often, but it freed me from being defined as only that person, which has a lot of irony because a lot of people define me as just that person in the book. But for me, once I told that story, it allowed me to become whoever I wanted to be.
I get it. I get that. Interestingly, in the kind of work that I come across, I feel that there's great fortune to land where one finds oneself finally, okay, it's time. I've got to look at this. Now, let me
Yeah.
see what can be done with this and what I working, whether with a therapist or writing a book or owning one story. I think that in my experience, the bigger challenge or the biggest of our challenges is to land here, somehow to own that there has been a trauma, the word trauma itself, to
Yeah.
fully understand it as a younger person and to see because the inside out view of our own
Mm.
lives and our own psyche, emotions has fallen into a routine that this is how things are, this is how things will always be, appears for a younger
Mm.
person, isn't it?
Yeah. And I guess my question for you is that all you'll ever be?
Yeah, that's the big challenge for a person. So now how does a young person figure out that, okay, this is not all that one can? So I'm just wondering, how can one bring oneself to notice that what's going on for me is not all that needs to go on. This is
Mm.
not all that I don't need
Yeah.
to be limited
I
by.
mean, I think that's a fascinating piece about youth, right? I was just at a conference with a lot of young people over this past weekend, and it was fun because they're like new into a career, right? So they're finishing up education, they're the last part of their education, getting ready for this new phase. And so just the questions that they ask and the place that they are in life was really fascinating to me. But I also think there's no rush. That part of human development is coming to that realization. And listen, I know people in their 50s and 60s who haven't had that realization yet, or in their 70s and 80s who haven't. And I know some young people in their teens who have realized it, people, young career folks, 20s and 30s who have realized it. So it's not a timing thing. I think for me, I remember when my daughter was really young and people would ask her what she'd want to do, and she'd say, I don't know. And people would almost seem to get upset by it. But
Yeah,
we've always just encouraged just do what makes you happy. Like the world is so short.
so true.
And sometimes there is a practicality to a paycheck. People need to support themselves, people need to take care of basic needs, but at what cost? And one thing as an American that I'm always jealous about, most the rest of the world besides us lives in multi-generational families where there's less stress on money because we're all kind of sharing in
Yeah.
this one household. So one person might be able to explore passion versus just chasing a paycheck. And I think there's a lot to be said about that, right? Is that have we lost that? That when we talk about being a person, it's about balance, and you
Yeah.
never want it too far one way or too far the other way. But we're, and perhaps as I get older as well, admit that it's a short amount of time we're here, and spending that in a painful relationship or in a painful job really doesn't make sense.
Wow, this is such an important thing. I believe what I've come to feel, and tell me, do add on top of this. I feel the career ought to be a little bit about self-expression. One, just
Yeah.
what's my heart wanting me to do more of? This is the area that I thrive in. These are the people I do well with, and this is the tool that I work well with. And then the second thing is this is my way of contributing. This is where I feel valued, that things get better because I'm there. I think these two
Yeah.
pieces need to come together in career, whether it is self-expression and purpose.
And I think that's what we've lost when I talk about organizational trauma, that sometimes we've lost. Now, profits are important. We don't want to act like they don't mean anything, because if a organization, if a company isn't making profit, then no one can have a job anyway, right? So it's that balance piece. But when we manage or lead strictly from profit, when that is the only goal or the only hope, and even I work in a lot of public sector, right? School districts, government departments, things like this, where profit isn't really the thing, then they just substitute that for the task and we forget about the humans. And so all I'm suggesting is that if we're really going to tackle the workforce, especially with the explosion of AI, we have to remember the human component,
Yep.
and that the flaws of human actually can be good. It's like when people make a mistake is when we often find opportunity, is when we often find growth, and that perhaps we don't want robots who get it right all the time because that nuance is actually really good for us. You and I were chatting before, is it's really hard to know what happiness is unless you felt pain.
So true.
And so I think sometimes companies are so focused on their employees being perfect, getting everything right, never making a mistake, that you lose self-expression, you lose autonomy, you lose the passion for the work, because now I don't want to share my idea in case someone thinks it's not a good idea, and then I'm going to be embarrassed and it's just not worth it. And so I just show up and push this button every day or two, try to say all the right things. And what am I doing anymore? What is the purpose of this? And we know that what makes folks happy at work are relationships and results. It's and the results pieces, does what I do here matter?
Yep.
Do I see the significance of my role in the bigger picture?
Mhm. I came across this book, a remarkable piece of work by Frederick Laloux. He wrote this book, I think it's called Reimagining Organizations.
Mm.
And he talks about how, with the rise in consciousness, with human beings becoming more complex in our capacity to take paradoxes and diverse goals, the way that we organize with each other, the way that we come together also organizes, reshapes from a perfect top-down organization to a more democratic, more pluralistic organization, etc. And he talks about how the present organizations appear to be groping for what lies next. Clearly, he says the present organizations are under a certain kind of stress, and here the word trauma shows up for me. That a person who is happy at home, cheerful at home with wife and children, now must dress up very differently in a very different
Mm.
mood of being an unemotional, a stoic individual, show up as a perfect human being who does not lose himself to joy or sorrow while at work, and why must walk the narrow lines, and he must leave his dogs behind, color behind, and show up as black and white.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece for me because almost every conference I go to where there's leaders, I'll ask the question, how many of you want emotionally intelligent staff? And almost the whole room will raise their hand, right? And I say, it's great, it's amazing. How many of you want to talk about emotions at work? And then you might get one or two who raise their hand. There seems to be this disconnect that even in the word emotionally intelligent, that emotions show up. But when we say it in that way, we push. In fact, I challenge people all the time, just go on LinkedIn and look, just start looking at random job openings. And when you look at qualifications, you'll see emotionally intelligent, maybe written in slightly different language, but in almost probably 90% of the jobs as one of the qualifications, right? To be a good collaborator or team member, to be emotionally intelligent. But yet, if in those interviews you were to ask, how often do you talk about emotions here? They would probably look at you very inquisitively about what kind of question is this, right? And so it's that paradox that we say we want something, but then suddenly we're afraid of the emotion. And so what I've noticed in my work are two things. One, how can you get more curious? What is that about as an organization? One of the things I tell leaders when they say, what can I do? We don't have any money. We don't have a budget. How can I move the needle? I just say, stop making statements and start asking questions. Amit, how are you doing today is a good start. But I probably know Amit's going to say something like good or fine. But if I say, Amit, how are you feeling today? All of a sudden, wait, that's a different question and it hits differently. And then I say, what's your goal? What's your plan for the day, Amit? What do you want to accomplish today? Oh, who could support you? What do you need for support on that? All of a sudden,
Yeah,
instead
absolutely.
of saying, I need you to get A, B, and C done, and this is the right, it just that slight change of learning to ask a question, learning to be curious, or when someone gives feedback that you don't like, instead of jumping to that defense to protect your name, protect your honor, give a reason why you've done something. What if you ask a question instead? What makes you say that? What's been happening that has, like, when we ask the question, we innately begin to empower other people. We tend to get way more information. And usually the information we gather doesn't match the assumption we would have made
True.
had I just made the statement. Because when we say, how are you doing? And we all have our standard good, fine, okay, whatever it is we say, I can assume a lot of things based on the way you said good, fine, or okay. But when I say, how are you feeling? And even if you give me a 1 or 2 word response, it's a beautiful day, or I feel overwhelmed. It's not a duty for me to fix your overwhelm. It's a ability for you to express it and me to use that as a temperature check to say, gosh, maybe today's not the best day to give you 4 new policies.
Hmm.
If you're already feeling overwhelmed, right? Maybe this can wait until tomorrow.
Yeah. And it also perhaps makes it okay for me to feel as I'm feeling. So look and check how is it going for me in here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we know that when you name it, you tame it, right? So that
Yeah.
when people express that feeling, it's almost like a bubble. It's like is released and gets to pop into the atmosphere, and we're on to the next feeling versus me holding in that I'm feeling overwhelmed. I have nowhere to express that I'm overwhelmed. And now that overwhelm just builds and builds until I'm probably going to lash out in some way,
Yeah.
not necessarily physically lash out, but I'm going to start ignoring Amit's emails because he's just annoyed me. And now I just want to put up with it anymore. And I begin pushing back in places that I might find that I have power and control. And so then those pieces add up. You asked me about my personal story at the beginning of this conversation, and everybody has that personal story and often attached to our trauma. What I think we forget is that organizations also have a trauma story. And because we never grieve that story, because we never talk about that story, this is what I often talk about as trauma ghosts in organizations, is that there's these little ghosts floating around, sort of wreaking havoc. They're not Casper the Friendly Ghost necessarily, but people can't even name them sometimes, but they're there. And it's what causes that heaviness in organizations where we get stuck and we can't move forward. Or for leaders, where I say they're playing that whack-a-mole game where an employee may make a complaint, they're trying to fix that complaint. Maybe they do get it fixed, but then another one just pops up, right? Because they never get to the root cause of what's really the issue.
Shen, say more about this. I remember some of our conversation about where some of the trauma in organizations can come from, particularly well-established companies or, say, a relatively young startup. A set of people working together. Where could that trauma, instead of being an individual trauma, become an organizational trauma? And how does that show up on a day-to-day basis? What impact does it have? You already began talking about that?
Yeah, it can happen in lots of ways, right? And that trauma story starts from the founding of the organization. So it could happen because maybe even in an early startup, the founder left and now you have a new person, right? And that change, people didn't get to grieve the original person who left, right? That change. Or perhaps you're got bought out and you merged with another company or corporation or entity, and that didn't get grieved. Almost any change can cause a trauma ghost in an organization. It can be as simple, I talk about this all the time, of move a copy machine in an office.
Oh, wow. As simple as this, as small as.
Right? Because somebody's going to lose something by that change happening, and
Right.
we don't grieve the loss. So it can be very simple. Yes, can it be like, hey, we lost our budget or we had a downturn? I was just watching a video this morning of the CEO of Eventbrite was talking about how they had built this company for 14 years, and then 14 days into COVID, they had basically lost all of their revenue. And she was, well, yeah, that's going to cause a trauma ghost in an organization. It could be something as large as that, but it could be small losses for individuals that don't get grieved, that we don't stop to process.
Or letting 10,000 people go these days. Some of
Yes.
that happen, yeah.
We just saw Oracle let 30,000 people
Yeah.
go in an email. That's going to cause a trauma ghost for the rest of time if you don't stop and pause and grieve that. And most organizations won't, because they're like, we just keep going. We don't talk about the hard thing. COVID was a big one because whether it was a positive or negative impact on your organization, I haven't found an organization yet who has said, we stopped and grieved and processed that.
What would grieving look like, Shan?
It can look like a lot of things. It could just look like a debriefing, but typically it's an intentional way to say, how did that make us feel? What did we lose? And now that we know what we lost, what will we do going forward?
Mm.
But mostly we're just like back to normal. There was this, and for me, I talk about COVID because I kept saying in COVID, what are we going back to? What does back to normal mean? This thing has happened. We can never go back to life before COVID. That's an impossible thing, right? None of us have time travel. What are we talking about here? And the real truth is, what if we just stopped and said, Amit, what did COVID cost you? What did it cost your family? What did it cost your organization? What did you lose? What did you gain? And now knowing everything we know, what will we do going forward?
And what did it feel like of
Yeah.
feeling? And not essentially from a point of view of addressing all of it, but letting the person feel. Grieving would be a little bit about, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, it's that grieving, it's feeling it, it's saying, yeah, I was really frustrated, or I was really scared, or I lost family members, or we lost colleagues, or whatever it happens to be, because it's going to have different impacts across different industries. Some people very much enjoyed COVID. They loved being home with their family and working remotely, and they got a lot of good out of it. And there's people who lost greatly as well. And so letting people express that, we know, is the simplest way to really be able to move forward.
but
But what you've seen in the corporate sector is, okay, COVID happened, everyone was told to work remotely, people made that work. And now that we're 5 or 6 years post COVID, come back to the office
yeah.
with no processing. Wait a second.
Hmm. And also the
What's
left brain
happening?
leadership. It's as if all of the way that we show up in at work and the previous conversation we were talking about, dress up for office, don't be an emotional
Yes.
being. Okay, what do we do about this? As if, so we've let the 10,000 people go. So people might be upset or there might be some emotion in the system. What do we do about it? Let's immediately do something about it, give them a few extra bucks and get going or whatever, that approach,
Yeah.
let's solve this as a problem.
But the thing, especially about letting a large, doing a mass layoff that
Mm.
we don't take into account is exactly what I was saying earlier. The thing that makes us happy at work is relationships and results. So it's likely in that 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 people you let go were people I had relationships with. And so I have to grieve the loss of those relationships.
So what is the biggest reason why a typical organization, particularly a business organization, for-profit organization, has no patience or time or intention or whatever be it that would give an opportunity for emotional recovery, grieving, and coming back?
I think it's really simple. And I think it comes down to profit, which is now what we know behind the scenes is if you do this work, it will save you money long term, but not short term. It will cost you short term. But we like right now results, and people are people. So even when we're doing best practices, you're still going to rub against difficult people and people not willing to try. One of the things I see the most is people who are just like, I don't want to talk about feelings at work. That's not because they've lived in a system so long where that's been pushed aside that they're in a point in their career where there is no space.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like this is where we're really fortunate to have the most young people entering the workforce in a very long period of time who really seem to get this work and understand it at that level. And it's where there's a yes and. It's where I think we can bridge those dynamics. But I think really for organizations, what I see is it takes visionary leaders to realize it's going to take a long time to do this, but we're going to have sustainability forever. Because once we embed this into our culture, it's really hard to get it out. So if we do this hard work, if we peel that band aid off, yep, it's going to be really uncomfortable in the beginning. We might even lose some people in the beginning. But when you can get over the hump of the hard stuff, what I've seen is people who never leave organizations, especially if they've been there through that hard piece because they don't want to do it a second time.
So true.
When I think about my own personal healing journey, I make choices now and I think, ooh, this could short term be good for me, but long term be bad for me. And I already know what it's like to do the hard work and I don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
And so I can look at many organizations that I've worked with where people say to me, oh, I'd never leave now. Like I was thinking about leaving when we started this in the beginning. And now I could never see myself leaving this organization because I care about these people And we did that hard work. And I know at our core, this is now what we really care about as people. And that's more important than money.
I agree. And I believe, as you said, I think it does come down to leadership. And the leader's job, it appears to be more than just making stuff happen. It appears to be to also check on the energy of people, emotional energy, how enthusiastic or free are people feeling to express themselves in terms of exploring innovation, creativity, trying new ideas. So really checking on how energized or how emotionally free and open, light do they feel to. And leaders do not appear to have much of a time these days, particularly coming from the doing, making stuff happen mindset to push hard. All right, let's make stuff happen.
It might challenge a lot to leaders. And to me, leader isn't just a title, right? That we have leaders in all places. We have covert leaders. There's all kinds of ways we can use that term, but what's more important, the task or the people? And I ask leaders this all the time when you're doing one-on-ones with people, what's the focus of the meeting? It's an easy tell. What are you spending the time of that one-on-one talking about? Or even if you don't do one-on-ones, if you do team meetings or department meetings or whatever that looks like for you, what's taking up the majority of the agenda? It's a telltale sign of what is really important here.
Wow.
And I think, especially in 2026, we have to be like, I love technology. Like, it allows us to do this podcast, right? There was a time where you and I couldn't be in different parts of this country doing this podcast. One of us would have had a phone to the other, and it would have been like a huge ordeal. So, technology gives us a lot, but it's also secretly taking away things
Yep.
covertly. And in organizations, I talk about this all the time. Like, we mostly don't hang out at the water cooler or coffee pot anymore to, hey, Amit, what have you been up to? What are the kids doing? Because we each bring our own coffee and we just go right to our own office or space and we don't even run into each other. Or we'd say, hey, what are you watching on TV? Because we were all watching the same 3 television shows when we were younger. Now we're not. Now everybody's streaming their own thing. And I don't even know if I have the same streaming platforms, right? Like we're not even on the same planet. And so we have to be much more intentional about connecting than probably ever before, where it could naturally happen. We have to be intentional about making it happen. And that's why I say, what's on the agenda on your one-on-ones? What's on the agenda in your team meetings? Do you spend any time connecting, or do you see that as fluff?
Yeah, I get it. And also, I'm sensing that even we were talking earlier about it, family as an organization, yeah, paying attention or pausing to actually ask even the people that we meet morning, day, and afternoon questions like, how are you feeling today? Different from, how's the day going? How was your day? It went well.
Yeah. It's really funny because when I teach those questions for community meeting and people are like, oh, I don't know if we can do that at work. I often say, what if you asked at the dinner table tonight?
Mm.
What would change? And people are like, oh my gosh, my spouse would think I'm up to something, or my kids. Like, because we never ask. Even when you pick your kids up from school and you say, how was your day?
Yeah.
And most parents report, fine, okay, right? That's what kids say. If you would like more information, and most parents would like more information,
We'll have to ask different questions.
ask a different question, right? And that different question wakes the brain up and it gets that brain into that executive functioning to have logical thought and reasoning and really. So sometimes, like, I'll just be at trainings and I say, if I gave you $1 million, but you had to spend it tomorrow, what would you do? And it's so interesting to watch people pause and think, but that gives me so much more information about a person than how's your day going? How you doing? Fine. Even though I like, no, you're not doing fine, but that's all we'll say. And even when you find the people who answer that question honestly, we mostly don't want to hear it.
True.
We don't want to make space when someone shares because we think we then have to fix it. And I think that's the piece of learning how to own our emotions, letting other people own their emotions, and we can still have really good boundaries. So you might share something personal. My wife and I got into a fight this morning. Oh, I'm very sorry. Please let me know if there's something I can do. But mostly, you just need to let me know you've had a not good morning.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it might take you a little bit longer to get yourself going for the rest of the day. But I can't fix the fight you had. There's
Yeah.
nothing I could do about that, but I can make space and hear it and understand that you are a whole human being and that your only thing isn't to create widgets here at this organization and that there's other things taking up space for you as well.
So true. Tell me, Shen, is there hope? Do you see there is a trend emerging where organizations and leaders are increasingly asking the questions around, so how are people feeling today? And say something about emotions. And we are not going to address all of it by actions, but really am keen to hear what's going on for you as far as you are concerned.
It's a yes and for me. I always continue to have hope. I think I'm a hopeful person by nature, so it's a bit of a problem. And I think we're in a really challenging period in the world, around the globe, where there is a big force to not let this work happen. That some people might call it woke, some people might call it all kinds of things. There's political connotations for sure. And for me, it's a little bit of a sadness that we're in a place of being kind has a negative connotation to it. Caring for somebody else who may look different, think different, be different from us shouldn't be embraced when we know that it's that sort of diversity that really makes us great. I think that's how America has become a powerhouse all along is its embracing of differences. So I think it's a yes and. I think there is a ton of hope on the horizon, but I think right now it's a little bit of clutching on to what used to be. And I think what's happening at the national and world level is a microcosm of change in general. Is that when change happens, it's really hard. The brain does not like change. And I tell people this all the time, just move your spoons and forks in your kitchen. We don't like change. It's an inconvenience. It's uncomfortable. It makes us feel all kinds of yucky things, even when we know it's good for us. Change is hard. And so I think we're in a place of there's some people still clinging to some old ways of thinking and aren't ready for change just yet. And we have to recognize and hold space that change, even when good, can be traumatic for others.
So true. Shen, so when you reflect, and if you were to give an advice to leaders who are now getting into an organization or setting up a startup,
Yeah.
on how does one lay the foundation for us for a culture that would make room for the world of tomorrow, particularly more sensitivity and more robust availability to honor emotions, so that people are emotionally intelligent. And
Yeah. I think for me, it really comes down to just a couple of things.
Mhm,
Um, what are your real core agreements?
mhm.
And how do you make those actionable in your organization? It's one thing that you know this from your years in the corporate world. Everyone loves a mission, vision, values statement, right? All kinds of great corporate lingo, all kinds of great feel good words. They're it's super important. If you don't have a vision, it's really hard to know where we're going when the storm comes, right? To see our way through. But how do you make those actionable in your organization? So when you're thinking about laying a framework, you might say something like, we're customer first. What does that really mean? How is that actionable? I use a recent visit to my doctor's office quite often for this because their mission statement says they're patient first. But I recently went there and wasn't even greeted by another person. I was greeted by an iPad.
AI.
And then I signed myself in and then I just waited. And then I was waiting and I kept thinking, does anyone know I'm here? And then eventually someone just came from around a curtain and called my name. And I went back and they said, how are you today? And I was like, I'm fine. And they drew the blood and they were like, okay, we'll see you in your appointment in 2 weeks. And I was like, this doesn't feel very patient first.
Yeah.
This feels very much organization first. Now, I think my doctors want to be patient first. I think they have good hearts, they have good intentions, they have all the things. So, how do you make those actionable? And how do you really put people first? Not just the people, not just your customers or your patients or whoever you're serving, but the people that work with you. How
Yeah.
do we balance that all people matter more than the next task we have to get done? And then, secondly, for me, is ask more questions. And I think for leaders, you rise to that level of leadership and you suddenly think you know it all. And I say this to parents as well. And I've become the parents and now I know. Why should I do it? Because I'm your dad or because I'm your mother. We
Yeah.
find ourselves saying this.
Yeah.
What if you asked a question instead? What might you learn instead of making a statement? And so I think the more we can stay really curious, I think the more that can be clear for us instead of being so rigid that you must be here from 8 till 5. What if I leave at 4:50? Then we're going to fire you. What does that say on the days that I stay until 5:10, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is really important here?
Brilliant. This is brilliant. Stay curious, stay authentically curious.
Yeah.
Look underneath, look beneath all of that.
And I think intentionally in there, it's authentically and intentionally
Yeah,
is
true.
that it's easy to fall back to the old habit. And
Mm.
so to really be, that's where I think about some mindfulness and be intentional with why you're asking and what you really want to know. Any of us can just say why. It's
Mm.
not super.
Yeah.
But if we can say, Amit, tell me more about that. Tell me why you think that will solve this problem. I get a lot more information.
It's as if slowing down and becoming more deliberate, looking underneath, thinking a little bit deeper.
I love the
And
slowing down.
Sharon, I noticed that your next book is called Hiking for Stillness. So, what kind of stillness is this hike about?
Yeah. For me, it's really, I've said this numerous times. I love hiking dearly. I've been fortunate enough to hike in all different continents around the globe. But the first 2 miles of any hike is very painful for me. It's physically and mentally painful for me. And what I'm always looking for is that stillness. It's this idea that I'm moving, but my brain begins to quiet down. And for me, I find that somewhere between 1.5 miles and 2 miles on any trail is that first part. My brain is really, I should be doing something else. I've got 30 other things to do. I should return that email. Maybe while I'm here, I could text somebody.
Yeah.
My brain is going. And then something happens for me in that 1.5 miles, 2 miles, depending on how much incline there is, that my brain stops and stillness enters. And all of a sudden, it feels like nothing matters, and I have clarity. And I've heard people talk about this in different events for them, whether it's meditation or meditation is much harder for me. I like to move, but it's finding that stillness where it becomes very clear
Mm.
and that you're still having thought, but it's very quiet and it's intentional. To your point, there is some kind of slowing down that has occurred that for me, when I'm on the trail, all of a sudden it all makes sense and I can just see it very clearly. And that was a big part of my healing journey when I started my first book. And I just wanted to share some of those lessons that I had learned about myself, about evaluating my tolerations and my values, and that really deep personal development self care work that I think we tend to ignore quite often in our busyness of our lives.
So true. Wow. Thanks so much, Shen. This was extraordinary, really. Your work, I feel even more deeply that it's not just timely, It's
Mm,
pathbreaking, it's brilliant. It's time to pay attention to this. And there's something really powerful about becoming deliberately available and acutely intentional to pay, to look deeper what's going
mm.
on, whether it is into our family members or our colleagues. Thanks so
Yeah,
much for this.
I just appreciate your time, your podcast. I think it's so great. I'm reminded of a friend of mine, Tracy Wilmot, who works at the Vera Institute. I had asked her a while back, what do we do when everything seems like it's chaos? And
Mm.
she said, in chaos, in a storm, in anything, it's just about staying the course. And so that has been resonating heavily on my heart over the last 6 or 8 months. And I think probably for your listeners too, that oftentimes it's just about not even having to do anything differently, but just staying the course while you're in the midst of that storm sometimes.
Brilliant. And it looks like we are in the midst of a storm, and it appears to be getting a little thicker as we go along. Yeah.
Yeah, but also it means we're not giving up. We're just going to stay the course and we're going to
Well,
stick to what we know is right and get through it. And the more of us that can do that, the easier it will be to stay on that course.
what powerful advice. That's for everyone listening, guys. Stay the course.
Stay
Stay
the
the course.
course. It's been
This
my
is,
theme for 2026. We just keep
yeah.
staying the course.
Yep. Stay the course, stay intentional, and thanks for staying with us. Thanks for listening to this conversation. It was deeply meaningful for me. I'm hoping it was the same for you as well, guys. Until next time, then, take care, stay connected, and stay in the fulfillment game. Don't forget to like and follow for more such conversations. Thank you so much. Thanks, Shan. Thank you so much for this conversation once again.
Thanks so much, Amit, and everybody listening.